Hey everyone, so Blizzard just put out this video that goes into some details on not only some new features that they're adding in 11.1.7, but also long-term what their plans are for add-ons in the future of World of Warcraft well down the line. And when they put out this video, I didn't even realize that it was 40 minutes long when I first started watching it. I started up on my stream. I was like, hey, we'll just react to this video real quick. And it ended up turning out to be a fairly in-depth analysis of everything they were talking about, with lots of thoughts and speculation and analysis and so on. So I thought it might be interesting to go ahead and upload that section of the VOD here on YouTube as well, because a lot of you might find that interesting for viewing. Now, it's very long. It's a 45-minute video just by itself. I ended up dragging that out into like 2.5 hours almost, just in terms of analysis and speculation and so on. And that's a lot to try and edit down. So I'm pretty much just going to give you guys the raw, unedited VOD directly from my stream. So fair warning, I swore a few times in there. Like normally when I'm streaming, I'm a little bit more lax about my language than I am here on the YouTube channel. So I swore a few times in there. There's some joking around, some other funny stuff that happens, and you're getting to see my very much live raw reactions. There's a few times that my opinions change on things as they continue talking. So at any rate, that's what this video you're about to see is. I'm just going to upload it straight as it is. There will be more direct, like sounds good, makes sense episodes about the topics that are being covered in fact, I'm confident this is something we'll be talking about regularly, ongoing throughout the next however long it's going to take for this stuff to come to fruition. But at the very least, the next episode is going to go into this in a more like put together and analyzed and presentable, sounds good, makes sense format. But in the meantime, that's a few days away still. Thought it might be interesting to go ahead and show you guys the entire section from the stream where I was watching this video and reacting in real time. So without further ado, here we go. Sounds like they're doing some wacky stuff for add-ons. So let's watch this video and find out what's up.
Welcome to a special edition of WoWcast, where we're going to talk about a patch 11.1.7 feature, and then a broader discussion about add-ons in World of Warcraft in general. I'm Dratnos, World of Warcraft content creator.
I'm Max. I'm the raid leader of Team Liquid, the WoW Guild, and a content creator as well.
And I'm Ian Hazikostas, game director on WoW, and it's a pleasure to be here with you guys.
Very excited to be here. So what are we doing in 11.1.7?
A whole bunch of fun stuff, but one of the features that we're extra excited about is a new UI option that we're adding called Rotation Assist, which is really designed to help players who are maybe picking up a new spec or want some guidance on what abilities they should be using when, without having to turn to third-party add-ons for it. So we've seen that, there's an add-on called Hekili that is very popular with a lot of players. We're basically building in a very similar version of that into the base UI that you can opt into. That will, no matter what DPS spec you're playing, highlight the recommended next ability given your current energy, what's going on around you, and so forth.
So, okay, actually, hold on. We're going to watch a little bit more, and then I will start giving thoughts.
An extra thing that we're also going to do, which maybe goes a bit beyond what the add-ons can do, is also have a one-button version of that, where there'll be like a keybind that if you just want almost an auto rotation, you can opt into that, and it will just automatically cast the next.
It says it increases the time between using it, so it adds 0.2 seconds to your GCD.
Recommended ability in the sequence. There'll be a small GCD penalty associated with that, but we want to make sure that this is for accessibility purposes, that it's there for people who maybe just honestly aren't interested in the gameplay of like mastering their spec. They want to explore Azeroth and experience the story.
Quick aside thought. It's weird that they brought Dratnos and Max in for this. Not because like I don't think Dratnos and Max are like worth like highlighting or anything like that. Just those are two content creators. It's weird to attach a content creator to a announcement of a feature that is likely to be somewhat divisive. It's weird to take like, hey, Dratnos, hey, Max, you're here for this video. You're here when we're announcing this thing. So now you're just attached to that. And so people are going to associate Dratnos and Max with that. That's weird.
And the mechanics kind of get in the way of that sometimes. This should be for them. ideally, this is not a tool where someone is like being told by their raid leader to stop trying to DPS manually and just turn on the one button mode to meet some DPS check. That we want to give you the tools to kind of.
The look on Max's face as he's saying this. No, no. Sorry.
Just turn on the one button mode to meet some DPS check. That we want to give you the tools to kind of go through that organic progression naturally.
Great.
But so the rotation assist doesn't come with a penalty or anything like that. That's just we're going to show you what your next button is.
Exactly.
Right.
It's very similar to the Hakili add-on. It's kind of reflecting, just the latest kind of established theory crafting, and it's something that we would continue to update, with spec changes and class changes over.
That's really interesting. Hold on. I'm going to hear the rest of what Ian has to say.
Time. Ideally, it all's born out of the idea that we've seen a valuable tool that players feel like they should be looking outside the game to download, and we'd rather just reduce the barriers to that and make it available to everyone.
So that's really interesting, because one of the advantages that third-party add-ons have that Blizzard historically, at the very least, can't really do themselves is keep up with when the theory crafting and the optimal play rotation is something like degenerate and weird. Like, if you're a rogue and say you're an outlaw rogue, and the theory craft at the moment happens to be, this is the sort of thing that has happened in the past, the theory crafting at the moment happens to be never use slice and dice. It's a waste of a GCD. Just don't use it. It's a waste of a GCD, waste of combo points. Just don't use it. Or it's weird stuff like only ever use this thing at like 2 combo points. Don't ever waste more than that on it because you don't need it. Sometimes optimal play has you doing weird things. And from what he just said, it sounds like they want to try and keep up with what Theorycraft is doing. But I don't know if Blizzard is going to want to be willing to be like, yep, our add-on rotation, our inbuilt rotation helper says just never use this spell that you have. Just don't use it. Never use that. It's bad. Don't push that button. So either they need to be very, very, very extra careful to make sure that those situations don't happen, which is a lot more difficult than it sounds. It's a lot more difficult than it sounds. Or they're going to end up having the rotation helper give you, potentially at least, give you suboptimal rotations. Which maybe is okay. Like, maybe it's fine to just be like, yeah, don't use the rotation helper for this spec because you'll do better on your own. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, yeah, because there's 2 parts to it, right? Like the advanced is, I want to really go into this, is the one button thing, but that's not necessarily everyone that's going to use this. Like, I think this game, especially new players getting into it, it can be, there's a lot going on within a particular class, and you can be a little lost trying to figure out exactly what I should be pressing. So even just using it as like as a guide to start learning your class and move off of it eventually, but just having a base understanding of what actually should I be doing at a base level of this.
That's really exactly the motivation on our end. I mean, especially with warbands and War Within, we see lots and lots more alts, and leveling is pretty quick. You got a bunch of warbound until equipped gear that you're passing over to a new character, and just jumping into their full rotation. We've never played the spec seriously before, can be a pretty serious undertaking. And for some people, this may be enough for them, and that's fine too. But we recognize that there's so much. WoW has such a high skill ceiling that just recommending what the next ability isn't going to really remove that or fully solve that. There's still the muscle memory that you need to form, and then all of the nuances of, like, we might have a recommendation for a rotation that makes sense if you're fighting a target demi, you're fighting patchwork, but when you need to plan around the fact that you're going to have to move in 4 seconds, that's a whole different layer of skill that still rests with players.
So a couple interesting things there. One, as far as the one button macro essentially goes, the one button rotation commander, I don't know what to call it, where you're just pushing the same button over and over and over again, and it's pushing whatever it thinks the next button is supposed to be with the 0.2 second GCD penalty. I don't think that's a great method for training someone on how to do their rotation. Speaking for myself, at least, like if I'm just mashing one button over and over and over and over and over again, I'm not really paying attention to what that's popping up and saying to push next. It's to help you learn it. That's what I'm saying, though. I don't think it helps learn. I don't think the one button rotation actually helps you learn anything, because you're just going to be sitting there pushing that one button over and over and over and over and over again. And then if that button disappears for whatever reason, or you say, okay, now it's time to really play my class, you're going to immediately find that you don't remember what order it was telling you to push those buttons in. And more importantly, you don't know why it was telling you to push those buttons in that order. And that's kind of an underlying issue with the other rotation helper too, is you don't necessarily know why it wants you to use these abilities in this order. That's not been explained to you at all. And if the goal is to teach someone what the rotation is, and then maybe they stop using this thing at some point, that step of figuring out why is going to be a big hurdle. It's not necessarily something that I think you can solve with this problem, or with this issue, or with this feature. But I do question how actually useful this is as a learning experience. And then the second thing, which was what Ian was just talking about, which I've now forgotten.
If you're fighting a target dummy, you're fighting patchwork. But when you need to plan around the fact that you're going to have to move in 4 seconds, that's a whole different layer of skill that still rests with players.
Yeah. I worry that, obviously there is an add-on that, yeah, I assume there's nothing for healers for this. Maybe there's something for tanks, but even then it's not going to be able to cover everything. But I worry that when you put players directly on guardrails or handhold them too much, they don't want to look outside of that handholding. So I guess what I'm saying is, as a learning tool, I'm skeptical about this. As a learning tool, I'm not sure it's actually going to teach most players anything. Because I don't know, maybe, I guess what I'm thinking and sort of comparing this to in my head is, if you're driving somewhere, if you want to learn, if you need to get from point A to point B, if you are riding with someone or you're taking an Uber or something, you're not the one who's driving, you don't remember a single turn that was made along that way. Unless there was something particularly bizarre, oh my God, there was an accident at this or whatever. When you're sitting in the back of a taxi being taken to your destination, you don't remember anything about how you got there. You're just not paying attention. You're just there as a passenger. And that to me is what the one button thing is. If you're driving somewhere, but you're having Google Maps or something tell you every single turn to make along the way, you might remember that, but you probably don't. At least myself speaking, I still use Google Maps to get most places around the city that I've lived in for 5 years now, because I don't, I've just always been when I first moved here, I was okay, I need to get to Target. I don't go to Target anymore, but give me just give me a route to Target. And then so for the first couple of years that I lived here, and the Target's not far from where I live, the first couple of years that I lived here, I was still using that to get to Target every time, because I was oh, I don't remember, because I was just following what instructions I was given before. I did eventually learn where Target is and how to get to Target. And again, it's not that far from where I live, so it wasn't actually that difficult. But I don't know, that's kind of the concern I have as a learning tool here, is this is something that people will very easily not use as a learning tool not even use as a crutch. They'll just use it as like, this is just how I play now. I put up the rotation helper and I do what it tells me to, and that's it. And so when Ian's talking about things like, how do I, or the situation's coming up where you need to switch targets or you have to stop DPS for a second or whatever, and that being an extra layer of skill, I think that's just going to be, the player goes, I don't know what to do for a second, run around, and then go right back to whatever the rotation helper is doing as soon as they can. Like, I doubt someone will recognize with the rotation helper, at least very commonly, like, oh, I shouldn't use slice and dice on this mob because it's about to go immune and fly away. Or I shouldn't use not slice and dice, what's the rupture on this mob? I don't even know if rupture is silly. I don't play a rogue in modern WoW. But I shouldn't use my big damage over time. I shouldn't bother refreshing dots on this target because it's about to go away. I don't think the rotation helper is going to do that. I also wonder if it's going to like be able to get as in-depth as like, hey, yeah, this mob has no health left. Just use eviscerate, don't use rupture. Like that sort of thing. I don't know. We'll keep watching.
Yeah, I know when I'm trying to, play a new spec for the first time or haven't played it in years, it often feels like I've got like a 30-minute checklist of, okay, I got to set up my keybinds, got to make sure, oh, this ability's changed since 2 expansions ago, I got to rebind that. And then I got to go and read some guides and figure out how all my new rotation works, and oh, here's how the new set bonus works. So I could see it being really nice to just have this is a way to jump in to some content to do with your friends and have it work out nice and easily. One thing that jumps out to me is that a lot of the content I'd want to do would be like delves or keys. And in either of those cases, there's a lot of AoE.
Yeah.
Is this going to have are we going to detect whether we're fighting 3 targets, 5 targets, and is it going to cast my Arcane Explosion instead of my Arcane Blast, or is it just always going to be a single target?
It's not just single target. There is, some sense of, how many enemies are within your range, in front of you, etc. And so that will affect the recommendations. Again, the goal is not are within your range, in front of you, etc. And so that will affect the recommendations.
Does the add-on helper recommend that when fighting a mob,
how many enemies are within your range, in front of you, etc. And so that will affect
you
the
slowly
recommendations.
backpedal before before casting whatever the fuck spell it is they're casting?
Again, the goal is not optimal. The goal is not like this is gonna, okay, everyone's always gonna get perfect parses and so forth going forward. But as a baseline, this should be, it should be useful the same way that many, many people find Hakila useful today. And it really, like a lot of this, building on the foundations of the cooldown manager that just came out in 11.1.5, kind of reflects us hearing people in the community telling us that they feel like they need to seek out these third-party resources just to play the game at like a baseline effective level in competitive content. And us asking, like, is that where we want the game to be in the long term, and what can we do to build in native solutions to many of these problems?
Maybe don't make the game so fucking overcomplicated, Ian. Maybe don't make it to where you need a John Madden add-on to play the video game. Maybe you are treating the symptoms and not the disease here, Ian. Oh dear. Oh dear. He touches on that? Okay, good. We'll keep watching.
Like the base construct of it, there is a, this will help you learn what you're supposed to do if you are new. And then there is a, hey, I don't want to be the best player at this game. That's totally fine. I play it for a different reason. I want to collect things. I want to like understand the story. I want to quest. I want to level, right? And I don't want to feel like I can go into any content and I just don't really know what I'm doing. I feel anxious about that. Like you have the ability to just be like, okay, well at least Blizzard's got me. I can have something at a base level where I can press one button and just kind of hang out and play the game.
I do want to like give props to Max for this statement, because a lot of top end content creators And a lot of people that are in like super high end guilds and so on tend to take this sort of attitude of like, if you don't want to be better, don't fucking play. Which is dumb. Like, especially for an MMORPG, everyone should be able to play at whatever like skill level they find is appropriate. If they want to improve, that's one thing. But if they just like, I'm fine doing my tier 4 delves and that's it, like, that's fine. So props to Max here for being like, yeah, the one button rotation thing, if you're good with that and you don't feel like you want to learn to play the game any better, then fine, use it.
One question about the actual rotational thing. So is that going to like change with talents? So like, let's say, is it going to work off the base talent build, or let's say you select a talent that now moves a AoE button into your single target rotation? Is it going to be smart enough or planned to be smart enough to incorporate a bunch of different potential talent builds?
The goal is that it's aware of your talents and the
Zelani are back for 87 months. This is my one button rotation. Yeah, just keep pushing that button. Keep pushing that button. Thank you so much, Zelani. I appreciate you.
logic is conditional based on what you do or don't have talented. As with, this is, and the logic is
Potential talent builds.
the goal is that it's aware of your talents and the logic is conditional based on what you do or don't have talented.
I don't like the phrasing, the goal is that there's logic based on what you have talented. God, we're only 6 minutes into this 40-minute video. I need to stop pausing to react to the first 30 seconds of it so much. I don't like that phrasing. I know Ian fairly well, having worked very closely with him for a long time. So I'm pretty sure he's just like couching his language as like a just in case. But I feel like that's something they should be very, very firm on. Like, this will not launch without such a feature in it.
As with, this is going to be something that continues to evolve. We may not have
That's also concerning.
every single possible permutation accounted for in the version that we roll out with, but it should still be very useful in that form to everyone, and we'll just get refined from there. Similar to the cooldown manager that we know is like, that is a first take at this. We have plans to add much more customization.
Okay, good.
Much more functionality to that over time as well.
Good.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting feature individually. The thing that's most exciting to me is in the broader context of the cooldown manager, of all these other edit mode changes that have come out. There was a time 5 years ago in WoW where if you were just getting into the game,
I don't know if they've put like a monitor that he's looking at, or if Dratnos is just having like he's just having a moment. I don't know what he's looking at. I feel like this is something that often happens with videos like this. I feel like they put some sort of like preview monitor over there, and so the on-screen talent feels the natural desire to like look at that as they're like talking about stuff, but then not realizing that they're now staring off into nothing. That's very funny.
there was an intimidating list of these are the add-ons that you need, and if you're not using these, you're kind of worse, right? Like you're noticeably worse. If you can't track your group member's major cooldown, right? Like you're worse at Mythic Plus than somebody who is, right? And it seems like the goal that has been accomplished with a lot of these things that have been coming into the base UI is you can use those add-ons if you want, but we now have a native way to the game that you don't have to get an add-on.
That is pretty much exactly our long-term philosophical goal here, right? Like, add-ons are amazing. The things that the community has done over the last 20 years to allow people to experience different aesthetics, different functionality, have information available at their fingertips, like, that is a huge part of WoW's success, and we don't question or want to undermine that for a moment. At the same time, like as you said, ideally it is about what do you want? How do you prefer to have things presented to you? And not what do you have to do? What is a group mate or raid leader or whatever telling you you must download? Or if you ask people, hey, how can I get better? I'm really struggling at this. The first answer shouldn't be, well, download this add-on, this add-on, and this add-on, otherwise you're doing it wrong.
So that's the answer to your question right there, 20. Are they trying to get rid of add-ons? No, they're not trying to get rid of add-ons. If they wanted to get rid of add-ons, they would just disable add-ons. The problem is, and this gets back to what I was saying a minute ago, they've made their game so fucking complicated in 2025 that if you don't have an add-on that is helping you play the game, no matter who you are worse at the game. Like you can like Max uses add-ons. Max is one of the best players in the game. Everyone in his guild uses add-ons to help them play the game, because the game itself is there's so much going on all the time, not just like in terms of your own like rotation and everything, but on top of your own rotation, which is super complicated for most classes these days. There's also like whatever's going on in whatever fight that you're doing. There's what's going on with other people in your raid. You really just need add-ons to function as like a base level player. Like trying to do most content in the game with 0 add-ons installed is at best suboptimal. Like no matter what, you are missing out on something that you should be doing. So what they're trying to do is make it to where you don't need to install World of Warcraft and then immediately install like 10 other add-ons in order to be able to play your game at a functional level. This also has the problem of like, it's a huge problem for class balance as well. That I don't think a lot of people realize how much add-ons actually affect class balance. We're going to MS Paint something real quick. I don't think a lot of people realize just how much of a difference it makes in terms of class balance. So if we have a chart here, let's make a little chart. And our vertical line here is just like effectiveness. If we then have a bar, there we go. And we say, this one here is without add-ons. The N key is dying in my keyboard. This one is with add-ons. As things exist currently, this is often the delta between like a player of equal skill. Like assume the same skill level. This is not like super epic hardcore raider versus career delver. This is take the same player. How effective would they be if you gave them add-ons, if you didn't? And oftentimes it's a order of magnitude like doubles your efficiency as a DPS player, etc. Doubles your efficiency. So what they're trying to do is shorten that gap, this huge difference right here. They're trying to shorten that gap and probably end up with something a little bit more like this, where maybe if you have the best add-ons, you're up there, but if you don't have any add-ons, you're a little bit closer at the very least. And the reason that's important is because then if they're balancing for this guy, right? They've built the class to be good at this level. Then at this level, it's just fucking skyrocketing. It's insane. Way too good. So they need to get to where they can at least build for this guy and balance for this guy so that there's less of a gap there. More scribbles. Okay, we're done.
Because that's starting to get into that mandatory place, whether we like it or not. So yeah, as you're doing at this, the first answer shouldn't be, well, download this add-on, this add-on, and this add-on, otherwise you're doing it wrong. Because that's starting to get into that mandatory place, whether we like it or not. So yeah, I think, longer term, these initiatives kind of fit into part of, how we're thinking about the role of add-ons in WoW. As we could probably all agree today, there is a sense that if you want to really be the best you can, if you want to play competitive content, there are certain add-ons that are required, that are simply going to improve your success over not having them, period. We would like to get away from that being the case. I think I'd love to see a WoW one day where you can still customize the aesthetic look of your UI, you can have information and quest helpers and all the other things that you might want to have to make your experience a bit more seamless. But that at the end of the day, when you're in competitive content, when you're queuing up for a rated PvP match, when you're going into a high key, when you're trying to get a first kill on a raid boss, there isn't the sense that you are, just holding yourself back if you're not using specific tools. We know that there's a lot of work to do to get to a place where that could be the reality. The first steps really are going to be continuing to build up the just right out of the box functionality that World of Warcraft offers to shrink that gap. But at the same time, I think we're aware that at the very end of this process, we probably are going to have to rein in some of the functionality that add-ons currently have to do like real-time in-combat problem solving specifically, where it's like automating coordination, communication in ways that are always going to be better than anything the UI could natively provide you, as long as they remain possible.
Yeah.
So that's the real challenge here. I've mentioned this in SGMS a couple times too. Most of what these add-ons are doing, they take just a basic amount of information and then they don't actually need more from the sorry, let me back up. I'll explain this a little bit more clearly. So say, for example, there was the recent fight with I always forget the name of the fight, but in the first tier of War Within, there was the fight where you had to like spread people out into specific spots based on certain colors and so on. And you needed to have a certain number of people around each individual thing, and organizing all that on the fly was insane. So everyone was using an add-on to say, okay, when this debuff comes out, figure out who all has the debuff and then assign each of them to a specific spot. There are only two really basic functions that the add-on actually needs to be able to perform that from WoW. One is the super basic function of who has what buff, or do I have a buff? You don't even necessarily need to be able to look at what everyone in the raid has. That makes it easier, but you don't necessarily need that. The second one is the ability for add-ons to communicate with each other. So you can send a message, an add-on can send a hidden message, an add-on message is what they're called, to another add-on that says, so that the people's add-ons can coordinate with each other. That's all that needs. It just needs to know the debuff exists on these people, which again, whether or not you can actually, currently it's going to look at the whole raid and figure out who all has it and then send out the instructions from there. If it was something where you couldn't see other people's debuffs, for example, you could still have everyone has the add-on installed and it just announces it over this shared add-on communication channel. And then it just does all of the math for that in its own behind the scenes thing. It doesn't need any additional information to make that calculation. All it has to do is say, okay, these 4 people have the debuff, or these 8 people have the debuff. Put these 4 in this group, put these 4 in this group. I didn't do the fight. I don't remember exactly how, I remember looking it up, but I don't remember exactly how it goes. Put these 4 in this group, put these 4 in that group, tell them which group they're in. That's all it needs to do. And most of that functionality is something that's just native Lua scripting. That's something that Blizzard could not disable without breaking literally everything, because it's literally just going like, this is just simple math. Like, this is the core of programming. You can't break that you can't break the ability for an add-on to make decisions without breaking every single add-on in existence. That's just how programming works. If it can't make a decision, then it can't do anything. So then the only bits of information, the only functionality that they could theoretically break with the add-on API as it exists currently is making it so you can't see buffs and debuffs, which would break a billion add-ons, including a lot of them that people don't mind, a lot of them that people like, or make it so that add-ons can't communicate with each other, which also means that a million add-ons are broken and no longer work properly. So that is a lot of work they will have to do to achieve that goal, I guess, is what I'm going for. Don't know the boss you're talking about. It was the one where there was like different eggs or something that you had to have certain number of, I can never remember the name of it. Ovinax, that's it, yeah. I wanted to call it ornithopter, but I knew that was wrong. Yeah, the egg break thing. It needed to assign the add-on basically was taking the figure out who goes where out of that encounter, which in fairness, that encounter was designed in such a way that if you didn't have an add-on, it would be insanely difficult. Like end of expansion final boss levels of difficult to coordinate that in a hurry. So I think that's largely a case of Blizzard made a fight that was more complicated than it should have been. Not so much add-ons are making the game easy for us. Like, oh no, add-ons have trivialized our encounter. Well, yeah, it's because you made your encounter stupid. All right.
Yeah, so that moves us into like raid bosses where I don't want to name any names, but there are people who have optimized a little bit of their own fun out of the game sometimes. I don't know where any of them might be sitting. They could be anywhere. They could be in this room with us.
Yeah.
Hey man, I am the like #1. Let's just YOLO this. Let's just do the fight. Let's make it work. And then sometimes it gets to let's try to make something that could be 95% successful, 100 or 99, right? And there's a lot of frustration with the tech involved with that. I would definitely be. I think a lot of the rating community would be pretty for that. You know, I think a well-designed mechanic that the game giving you enough information to solve this on your own realistically. A lot of the times the community will just use one because it's like what everyone else uses. It gets you in the same place. But if that doesn't exist and the game is giving you that information, it's objectively better, right?
And even if you are doing it very well, you know, manually, it's always going to be better to do it perfectly in a competitive situation. I mean, having watched, you know, your raid leading, for example, over many, many years over the Race to World First, like years ago, you would call much more stuff verbally.
Very
like
true.
going back to,
Yeah.
you know, Legion, BFA era, whereas nowadays it seems like if there is something you're calling repeatedly on attempts, the first thing you're doing is asking if, hey,
Trying to
can we automate this and get me out of the business of talking?
Hey, someone bought a hat. Thank you so much, whoever bought a hat. Appreciate you. Hope you enjoy it. I love that hat. I'm not wearing it today, but I was wearing it just the other day. Thank you so much, whoever bought a hat.
Talking, which seems like it might be less enjoyable for you as a raid leader.
Yeah,
That's funny.
we're talking about
Hey.
that. I could talk all day
Sure.
about that. Yeah, no, I mean, I felt like you certainly had more of an impact when you had the ability to, you know, influence the fight more. But the
And if you would like an awesome hat, other people who are not 20, devilore.com. It's real easy. It's just my name with .com at the end. You put that in the top of your browser. Miraculously, you will appear at a website where you can purchase that hat along with many other merchandising options. Yeah. All right. I wasn't paying attention because I was distracted by hat.
yeah, I mean, if we're talking about that, I could talk all day
Sure.
about that.
Seems like it might be less enjoyable for you. Can we automate this and get me out of the business of talking? Which seems like it might be less enjoyable for you as a raid leader.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about that, I could talk all day
Sure.
about that. Yeah, no, I mean, I felt like you certainly had more of an impact when you had the ability to, you know, influence the fight more. But the reality is just getting some way to automate it for your players is just better. You know, it is funny. Like when I do that now, I think, you know, what else can I be doing with my time? I could be like looking at other ways to optimize, and it's purely for the sake of getting better. So yeah, for my own enjoyment, yeah, that's sweet. Let's do that. I'm trying to wonder also about those kind of mechanics. So like what bosses have existed in my head, I think in the past couple of years, there's not many, but have been defined by when we're progressing this boss, we feel like maybe we're progressing a weak aura. Something like
Okay, good job, Blizzard. As he starts talking about this question, he just shows the boss everyone immediately thinks that this is the boss that I couldn't remember the name of, Ovenax. Just immediately shows this boss.
Brood Twister or Echo of Neltharion or Jailer, maybe was one of the first ones, right? And those mechanics, I feel like, could not have been done or probably would have been nerfed without weak auras or having that effectiveness of that reduced. What do you do as a fight designer now? Do you?
This is a good
I know
question.
You're obviously like really passionate about raiding. You've raided for a really long time. What do you have to avoid those kind of assignment mechanics? Are there things in game you can use to like naturally sort out those things? Like, do you give more time for the mechanics? Like do you have to stray away from assignments in general because the community has just whether you like it or not, has like trained themselves to have something solve that for them. Do you have to like go back into like a more simple version of that? Do you find other ways to make fights difficult? There's obviously a bunch of ways to do that.
The way we design encounters has been influenced in significant ways by the way players use add-ons. I know, the community sometimes speculates that, this was built clearly to require an add-on. I can say that's never the case. No encounter designer is ever sitting around saying, all right, we're going to make this mechanic, and then players will write this weak order to solve it this way. All right, mission accomplished, let's ship the boss. But when we're thinking about the overall pacing of a fight, the tuning, we might get feedback on a fight that it feels like there isn't enough going on, when in actuality, there are 4 or 5 mechanics going on, but add-ons are largely compartmentalizing and making it so that most players don't have to think about them most of the time. And then players give us feedback that, hey, this fight felt a little bit slow, like I was just punching the boss for 3 minutes. And so then maybe we add another mechanic in the next iteration of that, or a similar encounter. We get to a higher overall complexity space where, there's just, you look at the dungeon journal and you're scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, and maybe half of it doesn't even matter because add-ons are going to handle it for you. I think that's not a great place for things to land.
Ian is a very good lawyer, or must have been a very good lawyer before he became a game developer. He managed to say something in such a way that it sounded like he was saying encounter designers don't think about add-ons. He was a lawyer before Blizzard, yeah. He managed to say something that sounded like encounter designers don't think about add-ons and don't design thinking about add-ons, which wasn't what he said at all. What he said was encounter designers don't create mechanics specifically for add-ons to then solve. But encounter designers absolutely have add-ons in mind as they're creating encounters, especially the more seasoned ones who have gotten a little bit more experience with understanding, okay, this time I made this mechanic and they just solved it with an add-on. So next time I make that mechanic, I'm going to do it differently. They absolutely think about add-ons as they're making encounters.
It also definitely ties our hands in some ways. Like, I think we do fewer coordination mechanics than we used to. Like, there used to be, like, if you look at old school WoW days, there were encounters where, like, the primary challenge for your raid was by design coordinating some rotation. And the execution beyond that wasn't super complicated, but making sure that this thing stayed soaked, or that you were rotating people through with their debuff or whatever, that became a big part of the fight's challenge. Now we know ultimately that that can never be the thing that we lean on for challenge, because it's going to be solved, and it's not going to be solved through what we think of as the more just interesting MMOE, like communication, cooperation, figuring out systems for having these things work in a way that feels collaborative. It's going to be downloading the weak aura pack, setting it up appropriately, maybe having 3 or 4 frustrating wipes because there was a typo in the configuration, that's not what I think anyone really wants raiding to be. And so we move away from making those mechanics as much, and lean more on things that add-ons can't solve for you, like moving out of a swirly under your feet with only a little bit of time to respond. I don't think it's a coincidence that more and more of our fights have those sorts of just twitch reaction, avoidance mechanics, whereas that used to be one type of fight that we did. The design space is definitely constrained by the knowledge that, if we lean on it too heavily, it's just going to get trivialized.
Yeah. No, that's certainly true. I'm still sort of struggling a little bit with the idea of how do you actually prevent that, though. And I think, to me, a lot of what they're heading towards here is a rewrite of the add-on API, which will be, if that's what they end up having to do, that's going to be a big deal, because that means every add-on likely needs to be rewritten, from its core. Every add-on will stop if they just redo the add-on API in a way to prevent all of this stuff. They will have to reconfigure things at such a basic level that every add-on will stop working, and that will be a big moment if that's what ends up happening. But otherwise, just simple basic stuff like, this person has to soak this first, and then this person has to soak it, and then this person has to soak it. Here's the spot to soak things, rotate people in and out. Just creating a little loop of, here is this list of players, this one goes first, this one goes second, this one goes third, and announcing that 1, 2, 3 rotation, none of that requires any sort of complicated add-on stuff whatsoever to do. So removing that functionality would require removing massive, massive swaths of add-on capability, to the extent that they would basically have to disable scripting entirely for that to work. Yeah, what's up, Bree?
Some of my favorite WoW raid boss memories are bosses like Mythic Unat, Mythic Anduin. You know, you have to spread out and then you get these marks and you have to go to the right places. And there used to be definitely a library of mechanics like that, where you would get them and then you'd have to think and you'd have to have like a system and you'd have to have 20 players sort of coordinate and become one team that does a mechanic like that. And the fact now that add-ons take on much of that job of coordinating us, I think that almost all the Mythic Raiders I know would be delighted to move back to a world where we did that in our brains, right? But in Dragonflight, we saw a little bit of an attempt to make that happen, right, with the private aura system. And what ended up happening was we still had the weak aura, but now we also have a macro that we need to press, and then the weak aura will assign us the same thing. So
this is exactly what I was just talking about, what Dragnos is talking about here. There are so many of these things, so many of these add-ons don't, like even weak auras, they don't need you to, they don't need to be able to detect stuff to do things. At worst, it's what Dratnos just described, where, oh, mechanic is happening, push button, it will then tell me what to do. Like, if the game can't, like going back to the Ovinax example, where the eggs, and you needed certain numbers of people to stand around certain eggs, and you needed to split the number of people who had this debuff up. If they had just disabled, and they may have even done this, I actually don't remember, but if they had just disabled it to where you couldn't detect the aura on you, you would just push a button when you would like recognize that you had it, and then you would push a button, and then that button that you push, that macro that you push, because macros are just add-ons. A lot of people don't realize this. Macros are just like very limited add-ons. Anything that you can do in an add-on, you can also do in a macro. It might take a lot of macros to do it, but you can do anything in a macro that you can do in an add-on. And maybe that's one of the things that they want to break here. Maybe that's a good target for them to be like, no longer allow full scripting in macros. That would solve a lot of these problems. But people play with cast sequence macros that mimic the one button thing. Yeah, cast sequence stuff is a little bit different. That's a little bit more trimmed down. But like literally, there's the /script macro command. And inside that, you just put Lua code, whatever it is. If you've ever typed like /script, I can't think of an actual command right now, but auto action button 1 click. If you've ever done a macro like that before, because you needed to, maybe it's extra action, whatever, extra action button 1 _ click or whatever. If you've ever done a script like that in like a macro asks you to do it or whatever, that was a common one that people were using for how to macro your the bonus action button that shows up in the middle. That's just, you're just running the Lua code to click that button when you make that macro. So you could theoretically have an add-on that is /script a whole bunch of things, and it would be an add-on that's built into a macro. That's what a lot of players used to do for arena championships back before the arena championships started to allow add-ons to be played. They would literally have scripts that would code a bunch of stuff, and it was all just macros. They weren't installing add-ons or anything. It was all just macros. Anyway, the point, getting back to the point of what Dratnos is talking about here, there's only so much that Blizzard can break before you start running into, all you've done is add an extra step to the same thing, where now everyone clicks a button as soon as they get the debuff. You click a button that says you have the debuff, and then the add-on does all the thinking anyway. And in that case, goodbye, Elgato. Welcome back, Elgato. In that case, in that sort of situation, and in that sort of environment, there's not much else that Blizzard can break at that point. I do think, like, thinking about this, I do think there is the possibility that Blizzard breaks that /script macro system, probably breaks this /console at the same time when they do it. If they removed that, that would prevent a lot of this. But again, at the same time, we're getting into the territory where they're breaking so much add-on functionality that they have to rewrite the add-on API to even make things still be functional.
So I'm a little bit worried about how's the arms race between the the WeakAura devs trying to come up with a new way around the restriction that you're putting in. Is this just a further escalation in that?
Hopefully not. I think our goal here is kind of disarmament and definitely not further escalation. I think we understand that if we're not going to try more little targeted things like that are going to encourage workarounds, and it just ends up with this back and forth. Because yeah, if there is a way to solve a complex mechanic, but you have to jump through a couple of more hoops to do so, you'll do that, right, and then just be more annoyed by the process. Our goal is to try to get out of that space entirely.
I'm really, I'm really starting to think that their goal here is get as much. It seems like the process here is get as much functionality in the base game as possible, so that when they break every single add-on in existence, players are less upset because they have more of what they used add-ons for in the base game.
And so I think down the line, eventually, that may mean, I think, some broader restrictions on specifically what information add-ons have access to about combat events in real time. At the same time, we know that that's not a thing that we could just do right now without providing a lot more on our end, both in terms of just UI type functionality, but also looking at how we're designing some encounters, how some of our classes work. I think there are tons of add-ons that are healthy and valuable and really important to how players play the game that do rely on that flow of information. Everything from something as simple as damage meters to, like, honestly, boss time, like ability timelines, like the DBM style, like when is this next ability going to fire, that people have basically been raiding with forever. That's not the computational WeakAuras. That's just, hey, this ability is going to happen in 15 seconds. Like, we want to build in our own version of that. Like, I think down the line, we'd love to see a place where there is a boss timeline as just part of the encounter UI. And that's not something you need an add-on for. And that way we can hopefully eventually get to a point where we're really just cutting out the WeakAura that solves the mechanic for you, but not the informational stuff that you feel like, that really feels like the game should have been telling you all along, where add-ons are, admittedly, kind of filling in some gaps there.
So 2 things. One, pat myself on the back. I'm very good at this video of pausing it, saying, okay, this is obviously where they're going, and then immediately that gets confirmed. That's where they're going. Secondly, though, the stuff about the boss fight mechanic stuff there, I think I have multiple thoughts about this. One, I do think that it would be a good thing for Blizzard to eventually implement some sort of like DBM-esque thing inside of WoW, where there's a bar that pops up that says boss is preparing this attack, and then when the bar finishes, it goes off. Just because that level of coordination is super, super important. But at the same time, that could be something where maybe the bar representation of it is something that's left to add-ons. And they're instead just giving you the information. They're giving the add-ons the information of this boss event is about to fire in this amount of time. Add-ons can then make a bar out of that if they want. But the base UI might just be something where maybe it just pops up with like a... Oh, my hair's being weird. Maybe it just pops up with like a... Gallywix is readying this attack, and that means it's going to happen in 10 seconds. And whether or not you need a bar on your screen that says like counts down to the last second, maybe you don't. But if it's something that it pops up with the warning at an appropriate amount of time, that you have it in mind, I think, yeah, something like that, Slowpoke. I also think a big part of why I really love this approach, honestly, from an encounter design perspective, is I think when Blizzard gets to the point where they need to not only have an ability activate, but if it's an ability that needs to be reacted to, they also need to put some sort of announcement that that ability is about to occur in some sort of in-game UI element. So when the encounter designer is making the fight and they go, okay, we're going to have this ability, this ability, and this ability, and all three of these abilities need to have a pop-up that says they're about to happen, it will become much more apparent much more quickly to the encounter designer in situations where they go, oh shit, I've put too much in this fight. I've put too many mechanics in this fight, and now there's like 80 fucking alerts going off constantly. I think putting that directly in front of the designer as they're creating the encounter will help the designer to make a fight that doesn't get into that situation in the first place more regularly. Also, I paused this at the most hilarious look on Max's face again.
Okay, so coming in 11.1.7, we're going to have the rotation helper, those two options. What of the rest of this initiative, is any of the rest of this in 11.1.7, or are we just starting the conversation now?
I think there's a lot of stuff that we're working on. I think, yeah, we've seen the cooldown manager and then the rotation assist coming. I think down the line, it's some of the stuff that I touched on. I don't have specific patch dates right now, but we are looking at damage meters. We're looking at nameplate improvements. We are looking at
damage meters,
like a raid encounter information presentation that shows you timeline of boss abilities coming up.
I like how he keeps phrasing this as like timeline of boss abilities coming up, because that to me comes off more as a like, instead of like putting bars on the screen and the bars are like constantly ticking down, it's more like a what's the next ability, and then what's the next ability, and then what's the next, like show what the next three abilities are going to be, show when they're going to occur, but you don't need 7 bars on your screen showing every single ability and when the next one's about to happen. The other, he said like a couple of interesting
damage
things there.
meters. We're looking.
Damage meters. That was the other thing I wanted to comment on. I am a huge proponent of just putting damage meters in your video game. I find it frustrating. Like we were playing Last Epoch recently, and I found it frustrating not knowing how much of our damage, like as we were clearing things when Ted and I were playing, I found it frustrating not knowing how much of that damage was Ted and how much of that was me. Not knowing, like, am I even contributing anything to this or not? There's always the possibility that WoW's community can be toxic with it. That's every video game. And to some extent, okay, I have two minds about this. On the one hand, yes, people can absolutely be complete dickheads when somebody's not doing enough damage and they're not pulling their weight, and you're doing an M+ group or whatever, and there's a warlock that's getting beaten by the healer on DPS. Like, if you're trying to do a high level key and you've got somebody in there that's just not pulling their weight, people can absolutely be real dickheads about it. But at the same time, they need to know that. They need to know that the reason that we are failing this key, the reason that we are not killing things fast enough, is because Todd is not pulling his fucking weight. He's AFK half the time. Like, that you need to give players that information. Otherwise, you're like, God damn it, Todd. You're just struggle busing because you don't know why. Like, you're doing your best. Everyone in the group except Todd is doing their best. I just got here, but fuck Todd. Everyone but Todd in the group is doing their best. And everyone's like, I don't understand what's going on. And Todd also probably doesn't understand what's going on because Todd's watching Netflix on his other monitor. But Todd, come on, man. Yeah, Todd's watching Daredevil on his other monitor. He doesn't know what's going on either. He's like, yeah, man, I don't know. This fight seems hard. Like, Like you need to present that information so that the rest of the group can be like, God damn it, Todd, pull your fucking weight. But also Todd can recognize, oh shit, yeah, I'm doing nothing in this fight. I am not contributing here at all. That's where I often find myself, is going through group content in games that don't have any sort of like damage. Like Zen gifting that sub to you, SARS, appreciate you. Playing games where there isn't any sort of, this happens in ARPGs a lot for me, where I don't know how much damage I'm contributing compared to the other people in the group. So I genuinely don't know if my build is working or not. I'm like sitting there like I was playing Last Epoch recently, and Last Epoch is great. They do a lot of amazing things. I wish there was some sort of damage summary that I could look up, because I had this like 2-hander plus shield build that I was messing with on my Forge Guard, and I was like, this build makes sense. Like the abilities work together effectively. I just don't know if I am doing reasonable amounts of damage here, or if I'm just fucking here and Ted's the one that's doing all the damage. I just don't know that. So personally, I'm a huge fan of games being willing to put some amount of like, yes, here is what you contributed to this group in the game. There are a lot of people who don't like that because they're afraid of being called out, and that's fair. Like the anxiety of I'm worried that if I don't do enough damage, then everyone's gonna point and laugh at me. I get that, absolutely. That's a dynamic that you should not be doing group content if you are like that. That's just something, like, just don't do group content in that case. Because I don't think, let me phrase this a different way. I don't think taking that person who is afraid of underperforming and putting them in a group in a situation where no one can tell if they're underperforming is actually a solution to that problem. All that means is like, you don't know. You just don't know. And then you end up making assumptions anyway, and someone gets blamed for it no matter what, because that's just how people are. So I'm a big fan of putting some sort of damage meter directly in the game. I think that will be a very good thing. I don't think it needs to be as in-depth as something like details, where it doesn't need to necessarily pull up like how many times did this ability crit versus regular hit, how many times did this like that's the sort of thing to still leave to the add-ons to parse all that information and figure all that out, assuming that they're still capable of doing so. But some element of what was your total DPS contribution throughout this fight? What was your total DPS contribution overall? Even if it's just like after the boss dies, it pops up or something like that. The sort of thing like end of an Overwatch match or end of a Marvel Rivals match, you get to see the scoreboard that says how many like kills, deaths, and assists everyone had. And you can still look at that and be like, one thing said they could have even better meters because I have all the info and don't have to worry about range and stuff, whereas details does. Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit like that. I doubt that Blizzard's goal would be make a better and more in-depth damage meter than details. I doubt that would be Blizzard's goal. But like even things like getting back to the point I just got distracted from, like you see the scoreboard at the end of an Overwatch match, and yes, there will be people who are like, what the fuck? Our diva had 0 kills and 12 deaths. What the fuck were you even doing? But like gamers need to be nicer about things like that for sure. But that person still needs to be given that sense of like, what was happening here? This is not correct. Like whatever you were doing, don't do that. You should not be 0-12 as a diva in any round of Overwatch. Like that person still needs to receive that feedback. It can be phrased much more politely than what the fuck, this diva's trash, but that information needs to make it to that player in some capacity. Otherwise, like what's going to happen is they will continue to lose games constantly because they don't know what's going on, and they don't realize that the problem is they're just getting their ass beat. Anyway,
at nameplate improvements. We are looking at, you know, like a raid encounter information presentation that shows you timeline of boss abilities coming up. Things in that general space. You know, I think we're looking at all the places where players say right now, you need this weak aura, you need this add-on to, you know, be competitive, and asking ourselves, like, how do we change our game to make that not the case? And some of that's going to be add-on functionality, or UI functionality. Other aspects are going to be looking at how we're building some encounters or how some class mechanics work. Like, I think it's super fair to, you know, point at some specs, like let's say Outlaw Rogue, who I know are, you know, easy one to pick on in some of these ways, and ask, like, how is anyone really supposed to execute this perfectly with the base UI? Almost any time we're tracking like stacks of a buff, and you need to make a decision where it's like, if you're between 4 and 7 stacks, you should do this, otherwise don't. Those are not reasonable tests for us to be posing to our players without providing them the information to do it correctly. And so we need to either provide the information, simplify the mechanic, or both.
Yes. Yes. I don't know Outlaw Rogue super well. But I'm glad that he brought this up, because that is kind of what I was getting around to earlier, was this notion of like, part of the problem here isn't that add-ons are making the game more simple. Part of the problem here is that the game is overcomplicated in a lot of senses. And as much as I love the hero talent system and what it brought in, the hero talent system has like ballooned that incredibly, because you end up with like 8 different procs, 12 different things that are happening. And keeping track of all of that can be, like, on top of what you were already doing is nuts.
There are a lot of players who love the version of Outlaw Rogue that has existed over the past few years. So I think there's always some fear when this discussion starts up of, is the answer going to be to simplify everything? And I think it's really exciting to hear instead that the answer is, okay, we'll maybe simplify some of these huge outliers, but we're going to bring in the functionality that makes it so that instead of needing to download a weak aura to solve this, right, instead of needing to have a complicated assistant tell you, now you're supposed to press this button, now you're supposed to press this button, instead we're going to provide that information in a more clear way than looking at the top right of your screen to see your buffs and trying to catch the rotation buff between all the other 20 that are changing in combat.
That's also a really good point that Dratnos just brought up as well. That's where I'm glad that it came up in this video, because I'd sort of forgotten to mention it. There are a lot of people who really, really love the overcomplicated class. Like, I might think it's overcomplicated, but there are people who still love that depth and that amount of complexity that goes on with it. And to them, it's making the class interesting, not making the class bloated. And to some degree, that's always going to be a little bit subjective. So it's an important call out to realize that while I might look at this and say, yes, the reason that you have to do all this stuff is because your game is overcomplicated and bloated, there's still players who are going to look at this and say, no, this is fine. This is what it's supposed to be. Yes, they're still probably using 12 add-ons to track everything, because they should be, because why wouldn't they? It's also worth noting, though, on the top of that, like, how do I express this? Oftentimes a player will enjoy something, and players aren't always great at analyzing why they enjoy something. They just know they're having fun, right? And that's not their job. It's not the job of the gamer to recognize, like, oh, I'm having fun in this situation because of this and this and this and this and this and this and this thing that are all coming together to make this cohesive video game. That's what the game designer does. It's not the player's job is just to sit there and enjoy it. So oftentimes what will occur is someone will really enjoy something, but they will enjoy it because of, like, if they didn't have like all these add-ons and so on as this like extra crutch propping them up, they would fucking hate it, because they would be just super overcomplicated. And a lot of time, I think what regularly occurs in these sorts of situations is player loves Outlaw. I don't know Outlaw Rogue. I haven't played Rogue in a long time. But I'm just going to go with the example that was given here. Player loves Outlaw Rogue. They have this rotation helper and all these weak cores and everything that's helping them play that. But they love Outlaw Rogue with that as part of the equation, with that stuff existing there as part of the equation. It's very possible that if those extra things that help them play the class were removed, they would then absolutely hate the class and then want it to be distilled down to something more simplistic. But at the same time, that's still going to be a different complete package than if they had the overcomplicated stuff, but with all the helpers that goes on with it. So I don't know. It's gonna be tough for Blizzard to ride that line. I do think there generally needs to be a decomplification, I guess that's a word, of WoW in a big sense. There's a lot of stuff that's happening in WoW that's just overcomplicated for no real reason at the end of the day. Or I guess I should say to little benefit or to no benefit. It's just overcomplicated. But bringing in stuff like the rotation helper, bringing in stuff like the cooldown manager once they make it actually good, that will help reduce the amount of decomplification they have to do so that things can still feel more like what they are today.
That's definitely the goal. I think we want World of Warcraft to be as approachable as possible, but we also love that the skill ceiling in the game is as incredibly high as it is. That allows for tons of differentiation and self-expression and accomplishment. But I think, a lot of, at its core, a lot of skill in WoW, I think, boils down to multitasking ability. And like even just, you might be able to do amazing damage just testing it against a target dummy. Very different world when you're also running an encounter and need to do 3 mechanics at the same time. And
rotation is not hard for any class. Just doing your rotation, if all you have to do is hit a target dummy and just go ham on a target dummy, your rotation is not and never is difficult. There's not a ton in the way of skill of just remembering what buttons you're supposed to push at what time. Doing that while also dealing with everything else that's going on in the dungeon or the raid encounter or whatever else, that's where the actual skill comes in, is keeping up with all of that while also juggling all this other information.
You see, tunnel visioning DPS are a meme for a reason, right? They're just focused on their rotation and whoops, they just messed up the encounter mechanic, or vice versa. Someone who is good at mechanics, but their DPS goes off a cliff. Really, like the function of a lot of these add-ons is to offload a portion of that computational complexity. And we recognize, like, if we are removing some of that functionality, we're providing more information, we can probably remove a couple of mechanics, but still keep the same level of challenge. The goal is not to make it easier. The goal is to make it less complex. And I think that's, I think it's a key distinction there. Because I think it often can sound like, oh, this is about, this might be about dumbing down the game or simplifying things. It's not that. It's about trying to create a more approachable baseline experience that still has every bit as much room for differentiation.
He's doing the thing that I love to hinge on, which is recognizing the difference between complexity and depth. Recognizing that there is a difference between, I have 47 buttons and I need to use them in that exact precise order, and I have 6 buttons, but the order that I'm using them in matters constantly. I appreciate that.
When you were talking about add-ons that things have been in the game, been inspired by it, you mentioned a damage meter.
Yeah.
So I'm really interested in just what your view is philosophy-wise about damage meters in games like this.
That's a great question. And I think ultimately we have to be guided by what our community prefers and what we see them doing today. The single most popular add-on used across the entire game is a damage meter by like a fair margin.
Okay.
The majority of players, the large majority of players, have a damage meter add-on installed. And so that indicates that people want to see.
I'm going to listen again to exactly what he's saying here. Because again, Ian's a very good lawyer.
Our game is a damage meter by like the single most popular add-on used across the entire game is a damage meter by like a fair margin.
Okay.
The majority of players, the large majority of players, have a damage meter add-on installed.
Now it could just be that he means the majority of players who have add-ons installed here. But what he actually said is the large majority of players have a damage meter installed, which to me, that sounds like, is it like just players full stop? Like if you're a World of Warcraft player, if you have World of Warcraft installed, it is more likely than not that you also have a damage meter installed. That's a big thing to think about. Like that's actually huge. Especially thinking about the concepts of like people being overly punished or people being toxic about damage meters inside the video game and so on. If you're getting into a group and you don't have a damage meter installed, but the other 4 people in your Mythic Plus or whatever do have a damage meter installed, they are now going to be privy to that information that you are not. It's really interesting to think about though. Like even if just like the average casual player still has a damage meter installed, or maybe this is indicating that more and more players nowadays are moving into group content, which would be interesting. It'd be surprising given the onset of delves and all of that. But I don't know. That's just an interesting thing to think about.
And so that indicates that people want to see that information at least about themselves. We definitely.
That's another really good point. A lot of people have damage meter installed because they want to know how they're doing, not necessarily because they want to track how other people are doing. That's why I use one.
We want more nuanced measures of success and understanding like how successful were you or how much did you contribute on this run, highlighting things like interrupts, highlighting things like avoidable damage to give a fuller picture of performance. But at the end of the day, you know, I think for someone who's trying a new spec, trying a new talent build, getting a new trinket, and they want to see like how did this affect my performance compared to the last run, that's an important piece of information to have.
People still don't know how to read it properly. They just care about big DPS number. That's a really good point as well. And I think a Blizzard official damage meter would be, they would have a greater degree of capability of presenting the information in a way that makes you more aware and makes you more apparent of this is how you were contributing here. This is what you did. And so on, as opposed to just is number big or not.
And so I think, you know, we know that in any world where we were going to limit some of the ability of add-ons to like, again, do that real-time combat event tracking, we would need to provide a damage meter solution of our own. And I think one of the exciting things is I think if we're doing that on our end, we can also have it be server authoritative, so you're not worried about like who's in a different combat phase, who's out of range or whatever. Yeah. It could just be like, this is official and going to be accurate all the time.
Imagine if you could have the, I'm going to come back to what Ian just said in a second, but I want to respond to this in chat. Imagine if you could have the option to share the data or not and just show your stats by default. I'm good with the default damage meter only showing your contribution or like your percentage of contribution to the whole thing. So like if you're a DPS and you're doing damage, show what percentage of damage to everything in the encounter was you versus other people, as opposed to necessarily like parting it out by person by person by person. So that way you could see, yeah, you did 30% as one of the 3 DPS in this fight. You did 30% of the damage. Like, cool. That's a little bit above average. But I don't think the idea of, I'm very good at pausing this video exactly when Max is making a face. I don't think the idea of don't show other people your data is smart. I don't think that would work very well. Because again, the whole reason that these things need to exist is because players need to understand how they are contributing, and the metric by which you're contributing is how you're contributing in comparison to other people. Like I can know that I did 20 billion damage on a boss fight, but if I don't know how much everyone else was doing, I don't know if that's good or not. If I only did 20 billion damage and everyone else did 5,000 billion damage, which is, I don't know, it's like several trillions or something. For friends and whatnot, I would share my details, but for randoms, I don't care to be compared to others. That's the problem. Like you have to be compared to others in randoms. You have to be. Like if you are doing group content, it is a requirement for group content in a video game, like LFR, maybe not, like LFR is whatever, but like a Mythic Plus, for example, if you join a Pug Mythic Plus group and you're getting to a boss fight and you're struggling on this boss fight, it is imperative that the group knows if someone is underperforming. It is mandatory that the group knows if one of the people in this group is not pulling their weight, because that's the only way you're going to be able to succeed and continue on throughout it. That's just the nature of that style of content. Now, what could be very interesting is if the depth of how much information this damage meter shows is based on what content you're doing. So that way, if you're just doing like a random time walking, it doesn't really care to tell everyone like how much damage each individual person in the group is doing. Like a random time walking dungeon, you're going to clear that and it's going to take no time whatsoever. It doesn't matter. As long as the hunter isn't AFK, it doesn't matter if the hunter is doing less damage than the healer, so long as the run is completed in a relatively quick amount of time. But if you start getting into Mythic Plus, you start getting into organized raiding and so on, you need to know if someone in your group is not pulling their weight, because you need to recognize that's why you're failing at something, so that you can either help them improve so that they can do better, figure out what's going on so that way they're like, oh, sorry, yeah, on that pull I was waxing my cat, stop that, do this fight, or replace them and pull in somebody that you're actually going to complete the content with. Because if we're worried about people being toxic to other players in an MMORPG, the absolute worst thing you can do is force a group to bring along someone who's underperforming, because they're going to be toxic to that person no matter what. Like that's just going to create a toxic environment. It is better for a person who is underperforming to get told, dang, your numbers are bad, sorry, we can't bring you. And again, people should be polite about it. I'm not saying that people being toxic about it is okay, but like say, hey, yeah, sorry, your damage is just crap, dude. Sorry, we can't bring you to this. You need to figure out how to do more damage. That is a much better outcome for everyone, including the person getting booted, than trying to force them to muscle through with someone who cannot complete the content. Because the fingers are going to start getting pointed anyway at the end of the day. And it's just going to make it's going to be a super frustrating situation for everyone. There was something that Ian just said that I was going to react to, and I forgot what it was.
Have it be server authoritative, so you're not worried about like who's in a different R end. We can also damage meter solution of our own. And I think one of the exciting things, I think if we're doing that on our end, we can also have it be server authoritative, so you're not worried about like who's in a different combat phase, who's out of range or whatever.
Yeah.
It could just be like, this is
the thing that
accurate all the time.
Someone mentioned earlier that the Wowhead article brought up.
Thinking about Mythic Raid when our brains go to how this is going to affect things, but the overwhelming majority of players are in heroic raids, normal raids, raid finder raids, doing Mythic Plus dungeons, right? When we're talking about making these changes to what WeakAuras can do, is there an appetite for changing how heroic and normal raids function as well? Like, do we see these problems in there as well for what add-ons can do and how they solve things?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it all trickles down, right? I mean, I think maybe even more, a larger percentage of players doing Mythic Raid might use specific WeakAura packs than, let's say, normal. But those add-ons are used by the majority of players right now, and certainly other, boss mods are as well. And I think a lot of it just comes down to, what are the coordination challenges that we're presenting? If there's something that everyone is relying on a tool right now to assist with, we would have to change it to still keep it the same level of challenging, but without that same automation assistance. And that can take many forms. It can be there's one or two fewer things to soak. You have an extra couple of seconds to like actually spread out on the fly. It's a pretty common mechanic of like, all right, 3 people get a debuff and they just have to like run out in different directions from each other. People have been just kind of playing the game and doing those for years and years. But of course, if you can like, if the time you're given to react is so tight that you can't afford to do that, then people do gravitate towards, all right, we're going to put diamond, circle, and triangle on the ground. Everyone's going to get an auto-assigned marker, and you just know, like, I'm going to run to my marker to guarantee that it's executed correctly. I think it's a bit more interesting if we give you a couple of seconds so that you can look around and make sure you're not running in the same direction, and then do the exact same thing. I mean, at the end of the day, raiding in particular, but group PvE, group PvP too. Like in an MMO, a huge portion of, I think, the fun of it is just coordination, communication, feeling like everyone's working together to overcome some challenge in front of them. And I think getting back into a space where there's room for more of that organic collaboration, as opposed to it just being like regimented and solved by an external tool, I think it like will open up a lot of design avenues for the game going forward.
Throughout the last couple years, especially in Mythic Plus, that had been ramping in complexity, you've seen, and actually if you can go back, like you can see the amount of things that people have in their UI to help them know that something's happening. So like back in Power Auras, it was, you know, there was just some giant
I'm glad they brought up power. A lot of people don't realize this. I was just thinking about this the other day. Weak Auras is called Weak Auras because it was originally designed to be a slimmed down version, a less powerful version of a different add-on called Power Auras. Nowadays, Weak Auras does like 70 billion things more advanced than Power Auras ever did. But when Weak Auras was originally created, it was meant to be a simplified version of Power Auras. That's so funny to me.
Some giant face on your screen would pop up, and that meant that something procced. And then it's gotten more, you know, refined. And now, even in the last, it's been ramping in the past couple of years. You see,
like that's literally why it's called Weak Auras, because the add-on it was based on was called Power Auras, and they wanted it to be more simple, so they called it Weak Auras instead.
like, you listen to someone's POV who's doing High Mythic Plus right now. You're going to hear AoE, dodge, frontal, circle. Like, it's just every bit of audio aid they've used to, you know, it's in the idea of being optimal. It's not required. And especially this patch, I think Mythic Plus complexity has actually.
I'm sorry, was Max just casting a spell? I'm sitting here fidgeting with this whole time while I'm thinking, so I totally get like doing things with your hands while thinking. But
circle, like it's just every
he's
bit. He's
doing some Doctor Strange stuff here right now. That's amazing.
Being optimal, it's not required. And especially this patch, I think Mythic Plus complexity has actually gone down as an intentional design point. It seems, at least. I think you might have made a post about that. So that stuff is less required, but people have like kind of already baked that in the UI. Is that something that you're looking to either have an ability to have that in the game? Or is that something you don't want to have happen, where it's more like you're organically doing mechanics because you see them, or are you okay with all of the audio and visual aids that exist currently within add-ons?
Before we hear Ian's answer, I love this question because I am someone who I definitely like I don't know if you guys can tell from the glasses that I wear. My eyesight isn't great. I see all right. I'm not like blind or anything, but like peripheral vision is a thing for me. Like stuff that's happening off on the side of the screen, sometimes I won't notice. And I'm also someone who, for like visual clutter, will become a problem. So if I have too many like alerts that are popping up on my screen that show here's this ability that's going to happen, this is why part of why I don't like the new cooldown manager. If there's too many visual pop-ups on a screen, random hype train. If there's too many visual pop-ups on a screen, I can't process that information. It's too much visually for me to take in. So I tend to rely on audio cues a lot. And I've oftentimes in the past, like I've specifically set up weak auras for like trinket procs that I need to react to. Like I remember back during Mists of Pandaria, I was playing a Destruction Warlock and I had a trinket. I want to say it was called the Unerring Vision of Lei Shen, but maybe that's a different thing. Either way, there was a trinket that when it procced, you just did, yeah, you had like bonus crit for like a brief window of time. It was like 5 seconds or something like that. Very brief window of time. And so what would essentially happen, because I was playing Destruction, and Destruction at the time, Chaos Bolt was crit equals damage, essentially, because it always crit. So it just got its damage increased by your crit percent. What that meant was when that trinket procced, I wanted to immediately cast Chaos Bolt. Didn't matter what else was going on. Cast Chaos Bolt right now because I'm going to do a fucking 6 million damage Chaos Bolt, which was a big amount at the time. Or whatever. It was going to be huge, essentially. And I had like a little visual weak aura that popped up for it, but that wasn't doing it for me. So I actually added like a fight bell sound to it. And just adding that audio cue caused my damage to shoot through the roof, because I would just hear this like ding ding and I'd be immediately like, oh, fucking Chaos Bolt, here we go right now. Because I could recognize that much faster than I could recognize the visual element. So this is why I love this question, because the way in which players digest information is different. There's a lot of people who play with no sound on in World of War. I cannot comprehend playing with WoW sounds off. I would suck so bad if I played with WoW sounds off, because there's so much that I'm reacting to constantly based purely on what I'm hearing happening in the game. Yeah, Lori Gate, it plays with no sound. Exactly. Like, I know a lot of people who play like that. In fact, I've known people who play like that and perform better with sound off because they're able to focus on the visual elements more when they don't have sound on. They're not getting distracted by the whoosh, whoosh, whoosh or whatever. But like me, a lot of times I am reacting to, like when I'm playing my Death Knight right now, when I am, using Death and Decay, I'm literally listening for the sound of Death and Decay casting to make sure that it went off. If I don't hear that sound, then I go, not standing in my Death and Decay. So I need to make sure that actually casts. That like little whoosh, whoosh noise that it makes. It's not exactly what it does, but same with like Death Strike. I need to hear the like whoosh, whoosh. Otherwise I'm like not certain that my spell actually went off. I'm not watching my health bars. I'm not staring at like my action bars to know if these spells actually cast. I'm listening for them because I know what the sound is and I know when it goes off. So I'm really curious what Ian's going to have to say here about audio aids specifically. Because I am absolutely someone who, if I was playing on a mythic, if I was raiding at a mythic level, I would be doing exactly what Max was just talking about, having the like AoE, frontal, cone, like that sort of thing going off.
I think the answer is mixed there. I think like audio prompts are something that are super valuable to people. That's something we want to continue to add support for on our end as well. Like we know we've got feedback we've gotten around the 11.1.5 cooldown manager would be that many people would appreciate being able to have audio prompts tied to certain things or procs firing, and that's something they would miss about weak auras. We want to make sure that we're offering that kind of thing as well.
Okay.
Beyond that, I think a lot of what we've seen is frankly us not doing a sufficiently good job of telegraphing the importance of certain mechanics and their impact, and players needing to come up with solutions for them externally. Ideally,
that's a good answer.
Concept that we call affordance, which is basically just what is, like, how well is something telegraphed? How intuitive is it with visual presentation? And ideally, the affordance of a mechanic should match its impact. And sometimes, yeah, if you have a random mob in a dungeon pack that has a frontal that will just delete you if you're not getting out of the way of it, and it's just one thing going on among a half dozen other things, why? And why? Like, how could we call that out better? With visuals, with a longer cast time, with how we're creating the pack in the first place. And that's just one example of one of the areas in which we know we can do better. Something else we've talked about on the UI front is,
I still think audio cues for that sort of thing would be a good way to approach that, because just make it more visible is kind of an arms race. As they keep just making things more visible and just like, oh, make the graphic clearer, make the graphic clearer, make the graphic clearer. When there's like 5 things happening all at once, then you have a ton of graphical things that are happening all at the same time, and then you can't tell what's happening. Like you've come back around to too much visual clutter at that point.
We would want the ability to, on our end, flag mob casts in Mythic Plus as like lethal, as like this should be a high priority interrupt, because we know players are going to basically look to solve that anyway. If there are 3 casters in a pack, and 2 of them, it's actually kind of okay to let them free cast, but one of them, if they ever get a cast off, you're probably going to wipe. They shouldn't all just look indistinguishable on your screen, and us expect you to figure that out on your own.
Love that. A lot of games have been doing similar stuff for a while. Like so many Souls-likes, for example, will have like, yeah, the boss is going to do an attack, is going to do an attack, is going to do an attack, or like random mobs. Actually, it's more commonly the case with just random mobs. You'll see, yeah, this mob is going to shoot at you, this mob is going to shoot at you. The mob just flashed white for a second. That means this guy is about to do something scary and you need to react to that. Other games have been doing that for so long, all the way back to like Streets of Rage back in the day and those sorts of games. I don't know if Streets of Rage specifically did this, but I remember back in the day there being like beat 'em ups where a little exclamation mark would show up over somebody's head when he was about to do something that you needed to react to, and the rest of the time they were just running around like doing random punches and stuff. That's been a staple in other video games and other genres for a long time. The concept of this ability is a big deal. make sure that players are aware that this ability is a big deal. And that's not the game it's not making the game easier on you. That is the game allowing you to engage with the complexity that it's putting in front of you, where some abilities are more advanced than others.
They did that in season 1, right? Wasn't there like a couple casts or like super giga you die death volley or something?
Yeah.
And they had this big
It's
animation.
The Arcara casters where they hunker down, there's green glowy stuff around them, and they're casting a volley, and you're like, all right, I gotta kick
You
that.
could be playing WoW for 2.
I can honestly say, chat, back to the point of visual clutter. I've done Arcara hundreds of times. I have never noticed these animations. Not once have I ever noticed these animations.
2 days, and
Yeah.
you're like, that
That's not
cannot,
happening,
that,
yeah.
that can't happen. Yes.
But I'm looking forward to
Like, I've definitely learned which spells need to be interrupted, but I've never once noticed that it had a distinct spell casting animation with it.
an M+ then, where if we're talking about maybe taking away my ability to air horn myself on a certain cast, something like that, if instead I have to be now looking at a mob and there is a sort of a visual language that I can come to expect, like if the mob is hunkering down and it's got particle effects around it, that means I got to kick it. I think that would be more fun for everybody as well, rather than having the air horns be the solution.
Definitely.
That is entirely our hope, right? I think, and just to be super clear, I think we see the taking away part, the restricting functionality, as the end of this long road. I think we know, we want to make it very clear, we're not sitting here being like, all right, we want you to play the game the way we intended, and we're going to take away your tools. We just want to bridge that gap. And we have a lot of work to do on our end to keep building up more improvements, more functionality. And it's not just the UI. The VFX changes that you mentioned are a part of that overall effort of us asking, what are the places where players feel like they need add-ons to succeed? Why is that the case?
Good approach.
And when it's like, it's not clear when you're standing in something, and so I need, GTFO or some other, sound effect to let me know that I'm standing in something lethal, it should be obvious. Let's fix that on our end. And we want to keep chipping away at those things, and hopefully eventually get to a point where really the only difference between what we are offering and what powerful add-ons can do is that small subset of like computational problem-solving stuff, at which point we can move forward.
Yeah, I'm still concerned about how they're actually going to solve that, but that's still. I agree with the overall philosophy here. I think this makes sense. I think another thing that hasn't really been mentioned in this video, but I think is important, is it's not just a function of making the big deal casts more visual and amping up the visuals on things that need to be reacted to, but also, honestly, there needs to be a lot of like dimming down of visual effects on stuff that isn't important. I'm going to sneeze. Excuse me. There needs to be a lot of dimming down of visuals on stuff that you don't need to worry about, you don't need to react to. Like, heck, I would go so far as to say the solution here isn't necessarily make the cast bar bigger on stuff that you need to be interrupting, maybe a little bit, like make it slightly larger. But if a mob has just like a base level shadow bolt that they're casting, and that's just what they do when they have nothing more important to go on, it's their auto attack essentially. I don't need to, like, I need to see that they're casting so that I can know, like, as a tank, I can interrupt them and then they'll come over to me. But I don't need a big old cast bar that says Shadow Bolt or whatever, or like literally just a tiny little line that goes across that indicates that they're casting something. I don't need to know what the name of it is. I don't need to know what it's going to do when it happens. I just need to know that I can interrupt them and they'll run over to me. I think slimming down some of those UI elements for the less important stuff and kind of just filtering out a ton of the unimportant information would help a ton in this regard as well.
So throughout the evolution of private auras, we've seen, initially when they came out, they were like kind of, a lot of friction was involved. And then I think they were done really, really well in a couple of cases, starting in Emirdrasil, where they were a mechanic like P1 Fire Act. You had the circles you had to quickly spread out for. They were pretty fast, but they were too fast to use a macro for it. And it basically forced the players into something they would have used a weak aura for, to just do the mechanic normally. And like, are there lessons you've learned there of like, this is actually how we can design mechanics or kind of assignment things going forward? And then also, is this, if done successfully, would this also remove private auras as what would have been, I guess, kind of a temporary solution to the weak aura problem.
Yeah.
1 second, chat. Okay.
We've definitely learned a lot from how private auras have rolled out. Certainly we understand that if we're ever using it on something that like is on a long enough time frame that macros are going to let you solve it and it's punishing enough to not solve it, all we're doing is creating an extra annoying hoop to jump through, and we like hotfixed off the private aura designation from some of those back in Amir Drasil, and we've let that shape how and where we use or don't use it going forward. And so yeah, I think examples like the Furak mechanic that you mentioned are ones where like when we know that everyone is in a level playing field, everyone just has to play the game, play the mechanic. We can tune it accordingly so that it's hard but doable. We'd like to be able to do more of that for sure.
Yeah, I see the Fyrak first intermission, which was a private aura and then had to get hotfixed off of the private aura, as sort of a cautionary tale for if there's a mechanic that is only doable with the weak aura assignments, and then we take away that without giving an adequate replacement, then it's worse than doing nothing at all. What would a mechanic like that look like in a world where we don't have a computational solution to it, right? Would it be slower and fewer sets of like lower damage numbers on these things?
I think probably a bit of all of that. There's multiple knobs there. There's, on Mythic we might default to like everyone in today's world, everyone in the raid has to participate in this, and there's enough things to be soaked that if anyone isn't doing it, it's not going to work out. Versus maybe shifting to a world where there's a little bit more slush, things are a little bit slower, there's a little bit more time to react, to get into place organically based on which buff you were assigned, stuff like that. But at the end of the day, our goal here is to preserve challenge, and we know that we'd have to design encounters differently in some cases to deliver roughly the same level of challenge in terms of how many pull counts it takes, just what progression looks like, while living in a different mechanical world. And I know that when we talk about restricting any kind of add-on functionality, many players very rightly, kind of reflexively say or ask, well, how am I supposed to do this boss in this tier without my weak aura? That would be impossible. And the reality is, if you couldn't use that weak aura, that mechanic would be designed or tuned differently. We would have ended up nerfing it right away or designing it differently over the course of even just PTR testing. And so that's like any future design in this space will have to be built from the ground up with that in mind. And I think it's making it a little bit more forgiving in a way that makes the challenge human rather than superhuman, as it often is when we're looking at like cutting edge mythic tuned things. Because you guys are really good at the game, as it turns out, and we want to make a boss that is going to pose a challenge and is going to take you dozens of attempts, let alone 100+ to beat. We do have to take into account the fact that not just you, but every Mythic raid guild that's going to follow in your footsteps are going to be using these tools. And at the end of the day, I think players do want challenging bosses. That if we just tuned the boss around none of those things, players used all those tools, and they went in and like a late Mythic boss was dying in a single night for like a cutting edge guild, rank 500 or whatever, that probably doesn't match what they're looking to get out of Mythic raiding. In my estimation. And so,
All right, I'm gonna pause. He keeps continuing. This has been the longest run-on sentence ever. He's hitting on something that's very important here, which is the concept that a lot of what he kind of mentioned earlier and sort of tried to allude to the notion of encounter designers don't really look at add-ons, but that's not correct. A lot of these encounters are designed in the way that they are because it's based on, it's not necessarily that they're looking and saying, okay, this is the encounter, this is the part of the encounter that they're going to use a weak aura to solve this, so we have to ratchet up the difficulty because they're going to use the weak aura to solve this. It's not that direct of a conclusion. It's more of, we made this mechanic before, and having a mechanic like this with this, the way that this boss fight existed, that had this mechanic and had this mechanic and had this mechanic in it, it took players this amount of time to complete that boss, or this boss was generally considered to be relatively easy. Okay, so if I want to ratchet up the difficulty and make the next boss that I make more difficult, and I'm basing some of the ideas off of what this boss previously had, I know that it needs to be tougher than what that boss was for the next boss encounter to be more difficult. So it just sort of ends up being a natural progression of, like, I put this mechanic in the game, and regardless of how people solved that issue, it was something that everyone was like, oh yeah, this boss is easy. You can go in and kill it no matter what. So the next time you're doing something, next time you're creating a boss encounter that has a similar mechanic to it, you're going to naturally end up wanting to make that more difficult, because last time it was like, oh, it's too easy, right? You're going to end up naturally wanting to make that more difficult. And that just means going and looking at what it was before and trying to, like, slim down the timings or increase the damage of something or whatever else it is. Be more punishing if you make an error. And as the encounter team gradually continues making things slightly more punishing if you make an error, slightly more punishing if you make an error, slightly more punishing if you make an error, that has indirectly pushed things in a direction where now they are essentially designing around the existence of add-ons, even if they're not necessarily sitting down and utilizing that as part of their creative process. So while the encounter designer might not sit down and say, okay, because weak auras exists, because bigwigs exists, or whatever, because DBM exists, I have to make this encounter work like this. It's more a function of, I want this fight to be difficult. I want this fight to be a challenge. This previous mechanic was not challenging enough. I need to make it more challenging. And the reason it wasn't challenging enough was largely because of add-ons. But that's just naturally how it's going to progress at that point. The reason that it wasn't challenging enough ultimately is irrelevant. They just look at, like, success rates, and they look at how difficult, they look at feedback and see how people felt about a fight. So if we're going to make this more difficult than that fight, then we need to ramp this this mechanic up, which in turn also means that Blizzard is going to have to be very aware, very directly aware, and they're going to have to really think about this when they go in and start making encounters, as they start eventually slimming down what add-ons have accessible to them. They're going to have to take a step back and be like, this means we have to make fights easier now. They have to make fights in a way that they think would be easier than it used to be, because players are not going to have the level of tools available to them. This is all, like, far off in the future stuff. I'm getting the impression that we're not even thinking even for, like, midnight having the add-on functionality pulled off. If anything, it'll be late midnight. This will probably, like, that's the sort of thing that they would want to roll out with the start of an expansion. So maybe the Last Titan, but maybe this is post World Soul Saga entirely, when they actually start, when they make every add-on developer rewrite their add-on, because I'm assuming that's where this is going to end up. Either way.
So, like, our goal is to keep the same overall level of challenge while paring down the complexity a little bit.
Even if you look at the history of bosses this would have affected, you actually, even looking at Mythic Plus, something where the complexity has gone down from pack to pack in this patch, but the reality is you can still find challenge in it because it's infinitely scaling, and you will get to a point where it's doing too much damage to you, or the amount of damage you need to do is too high. There's been Mythic bosses that have been simple mechanically, but have been unbelievably difficult, and that's been true all the way down the guild ranks. It's not something that's just nerfed by gear, like Sludge Fist, Kaiveza, where you've created really intricate problems to solve where weak auras basically didn't matter. Halandris, you actually put a bomb timer very clearly in the game around the bomb. You did not need a weak aura for one of the hardest bosses ever, right?
Yeah.
It's more just basically the solution for these weak auras has been just a very specific kind of assignment mechanic that is just like, oh, it's just so much easier to do this, right? You could build in a lot of that computational stuff in game to where even if weak auras existed, you would find people just being like, I don't know, the game just kind of does it. We have players that don't use audio sounds in weak aura packs because on bosses like Skarn, on most other bosses, there's like either an in-game sound for when the bombs are actually activating, or a voice line. We have 2 players in our guild that use very minimal weak auras, and they literally listen to voice lines for when mechanics are going to happen, and it's extremely accurate, right? So I think a lot of these things are already built into the baseline game. It's just about choosing like when and how to apply them.
Yeah, no, Max is making some very good points there. And I like the call out of things like Halandris, where again, one of the hardest fights that, like, I remember watching that Race to World First, and when somebody finally got Halandras, it was such a big deal. And it was a fight where there wasn't a weak aura that was going to solve that problem because, literally because, the information was already in game. Not because it was a mechanic that was made in a way that a weak aura wouldn't help, but because they put the bomb timer on the player and also on the bomb, so that you just didn't need a weak aura. You could just see what you needed to see as part of the game. And so that, I think, is a huge like point in Blizzard's favor for this whole thing, because it means that they can add a lot of this information into the base UI in ways that feels a bit more natural, feels a bit more immersive. Like Halandras's bomb timers feel way more immersive and way more part of the world than anything that a weak aura could have done. Like having a little icon that appears on the side of your screen that just sort of floats as part of UI and it just sits there and it's clearly projected on top of everything else that's going on is much less immersive than looking over at this guy over here and he's got a little timer ticking down over his head, and you see someone off in the distance with a timer ticking down over their head too. And you pick up the bomb and it's now over your head. It's much better than having like a weak aura that's displaying all that information. So Blizzard can do this, and they have shown that they can do this in ways that isn't as like intrusive as what a weak aura ends up being, and it ultimately ends up being a better experience overall.
Absolutely. And yeah, I think your example, going back to Nathri of Sludge Fist, I think is a great one, right? Like a lot of that was just practice and just learning like
It's
how to
standing in
react
the
to
thing.
situations when chained to different partners and dodging the stuff. And people were in enough situations over enough time, they kind of develop that muscle memory, that sense of planning, and eventually your guild as a whole overcomes the challenge. Compared to, let's say, the Stone Legion generals that came after it, a couple of issues there, but like one of the central mechanics that was being solved by Weeko was like, all right, there's a whole bunch of soaks that need to be covered over the course of the fight, and it's not realistic to have that like 7 to 8 soaks up simultaneously, where you need to also account for like, well, this person just got targeted by different mechanics, so they need a backup to go in and do it for them.
Yeah, so it sounds initially like it's, we're restricting what add-ons can do, but really we're opening up the universe of mechanics that can exist in a WoW boss without, because there are so many that you could think of right now where all of them would be, this is going to get solved by this, right? This is going to get solved by this. But if that's not the answer, then now the designers have all these tools back, and we can get these mechanics that maybe haven't been used since MOP because we've been weak auring them ever since, and now we get to solve them with our brains again.
And he even mentioned too, he said like, well, there's a lot of swirlies now.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing, like, oh, we can always default to this and a few other things because you're not going to solve that with weak aura, so we can add fights where that's not a thing. But you remove that, that friction of there's too many swirlies goes away. And I think there's assignment, like doing a lot of these assignment bosses without a weak aura that could work would be like really fun. Like it's fun to do that. It's fun when you have 5 people that need to soak something, like the last phase of Gallywix. There's a frontal on a side of a room and 2 people die, and right now weak aura is just like, okay, well then we're gonna assign backup. So these 2 people get a big green thing on their screen, go soak that. That is something where that fight is spread out enough where you could actually communicate that. We need 2 people on the right to back up because 2 soakers are dead. Who can do it? This person says something, this person says something. Now obviously you're not gonna have that kind of communication like heroic and normal, maybe it won't be in comms, whatever, but in Mythic, that's perfectly reasonable, right? A lot of the things, like we could probably count honestly on 1, maybe 2 hands over the last like 4 or 5 years how many bosses would you meaningfully would have to have a mechanic change, but they are very impactful, very memorable, and they have been purely defined by that. Are you worried at all about?
I do want to go back real quick to something that you were just talking about, which is all the swirlies on the ground. I really hope that this whole trend pushes in the direction where we do see fewer, like, there's only this tiny little spot in the map and that's the place where you can stand, as like having that exist is good, but it's so many encounters these days and it's so much of what you're doing like constantly. Even in delves, there's so much part of delves where it's just like you're fighting this boss and there's 8 places that you can't stand, and just you can't stand there is such a common thing. Have I done other low trade? Yeah. This having areas where you can't stand is such a common thing that I would love to see that get slimmed down, because of the notion that Blizzard has the ability to go back to doing more like rotation on a specific player, sort of, or not a specific player, but like rotating between soaks sort of thing, or like kick rotations, even getting back in that day. I would love to see more of those sorts of mechanics on bosses start to make a comeback. I hope that this change allows them to do that and that they actually do it.
About the communities, and this has certainly been ramping up over time. Like you mentioned, even for
What's up,
us,
Spencer?
we were much more just do the mechanic 4 or 5 years ago than we are now. Are you worried that there has been this built-in reliance on it that might be hard to shake when creating new raid bosses?
Absolutely. And I think
Well, that's part of why they're putting so much of this in the base game, right? Is because of that reliance.
that some of that gets back to us knowing that we need to really ease into this.
Yeah.
That any world where we just kind of rip the Band-Aid off and say, all right, have
Yeah,
fun,
honestly,
we're in a new
yeah.
world, as opposed to building up more built-in functionality, starting to have clearer visuals, simplify some mechanics, and then building counters and have classes designed around a world where we know that this isn't possible. As long as people are set up for success, I think we'll be fine.
I do love that. I greatly appreciate that Ian keeps saying, yes, we know we can't just do this today. I think a lot of people are going to watch this video and be like, oh my God, they're deleting DBM. What am I going to do? They're deleting weak auras. What am I going to do? Because they're kind of missing out on the nuance of that. And that is clearly not what they're doing. Their step 1 through 10 is put enough stuff in the game that you don't feel like it's as mandatory to have these things. Probably, like, just putting my own sort of metric on it, I would argue that they need to get to the point where people doing normal and heroic raids can do those with no add-ons installed. And once they get to a point where you can get away with not having add-ons for normal and heroic raids, that's when they should start looking at, okay, now how do we pare back add-on functionality, and in turn encounter design in mythic raids to get us across the finish line where these add-ons can no longer do these things, so that then future content that's created beyond that, future raids that are created beyond that, we can go back to some of these designs that we've done before without worrying about a weak aura just solving all of it. But I think, and I appreciate that Ian keeps bringing this up, it's very important that they get to a point where you don't need the add-ons first and then pare back the functionality. Not, hey, everyone, we're going to fucking just delete your ability to do these raids. Good luck. Like that wouldn't work.
Certainly, if we were to disable any functionality and then players went into a new tier and we're just wiping to bosses and they used to clear heroic comfortably and now they're brick walled halfway through heroic, yeah, players that will be a source of tremendous frustration. But we know that we need to avoid that by any means possible, and we have a lot of work to do before we get there.
Something that really encourages me is the ping system. That seems like such a perfect way to give us an option to identify where we're going, right? You can just ping where you're going, and then you don't have to, try and communicate with words. Hey, I'm going to move over to the left 20 yards, right? Just ping where I'm going, and that opens up an ability to solve these, again, in a YOLO style, right, rather than an assignment.
I think your guild did that.
Yeah.
So the Echo of Neltharion, right?
Yeah, we just pinged it.
Yeah, so
for it.
famously, everyone had the maps for that. Here's your exact spot you go, and then his guild was like, you know what, everyone just ping your spot. Mostly it gets covered. People go to the same spot every pull. But if you see 2 pings in a spot, 1 person has to move, right? And that could largely solve a mechanic with just something that's already built into the game.
Yeah, I think and the ping system is something we've also talked about looking to improve and to kind of broaden the sorts of things you can do with it to give people more tools to solve these problems in a coordinated way, but using their own skill and expression instead of another tool.
So Spencer, they actually said, Ian actually said in the video, that they were also going to cut back, make some things less complicated. I agree that the 1-button rotation thing is somewhat treating the symptom as opposed to treating the actual issue, which is some things are way too complicated. But Ian did mention, as part of this video earlier on, he did mention that they are planning to reduce some of the complexity at the very least of certain classes. It's interesting because I know there's going to be people that don't want that complexity reduced. They actually like, even with the rotation helpers and stuff and weak auras that they're already using, they actually like that extra complexity being there, and they like using a rotation helper to get through it. Like just in terms of the complete package of what they're experiencing, they enjoy that experience, and so they don't want it to change. But there are definitely some classes and specs that are just, there's just too much going on. I disagree that it needs to be huge cuts. I remember what happened in Warlords of Draenor when everyone had 6-button rotations and it was miserable and you felt like you couldn't do anything anymore. I would like a 20 buttons I use regularly as about my max would be where I feel like that's comfortable. But at the same time, like, at the same time, I also think there's some variance needed for that. Like a demon hunter probably should only have like maybe 12 to 15 abilities that they use with any regularity. I would argue a druid is one of the more complex classes in the game, just because of the shape-shifting nature. So that is probably a class that should have more abilities that they're using regularly than others. Mages is another one that I would look at a mage and be like, yeah, you probably are going to have more abilities on average than other classes. So there should be some variation to that in terms of what the class is and what the goal is with it. I don't want to see them try the ability pruning thing from Warlords of Draenor again. There's kind of the abilities in my different shifts is like 68 buttons. Yeah, for sure. There's like I have this problem on my resto druid or resto shaman, sorry, where like why I have a button that I push to make my totems cast again, but why, like, I don't like totemic recall or whatever it's called. I just don't like that ability first and foremost. But secondly, like, it's just an extra button that I have to have, and then I have 12 other buttons that are going on and so forth. And like there's certainly classes that are heavily overcomplicated in that regard. I don't think the rotation helper or the 1-button thing is going to actually, because I see those things being primarily as I see the rotation helper and the 1-button thing being primarily your core DPS rotation. Your core, like, it's not going to tell you to use cooldowns. It's not going to tell you to pop fucking like Avenging Wrath or anything like that. It's not going to put that in there. It's just going to be like, now press Crusader Strike. Now press Templar's Verdict or whatever Rhett uses. I haven't played Rhett this expansion. As a demonology warlock, it's going to be like, now use Hand of Gul'dan. Now use Demon Bolt. Now use Shadow Bolt. It's not going to say, now use summon Grimoire, whatever it is, thing. It's not going to tell you, now summon your Void Fiend or anything like that, or whatever that thing is called. I imagine those are just primary, your basic rotation, and then for things like extra cooldowns, utility spells, and so on, it's not, those aren't even going to be part of that.
When I think of World of Warcraft, I'm always thinking back to when I first started playing the game, and there was this really exciting moment where I looked at it and I'm like, oh my god, I can make this game look however I want, right? Like, I can put this here, I can have an add-on that tells me what time it is in London, what time it is in Darnassus, right? I can have all the world clocks there if I want. I can have 3 different bars at the bottom of my screen. I can do whatever I want there, and to me, that's always been a strength, not a weakness of WoW. So I think there's a lot of people that disagree with me on that, but then there's also people that they hear about Blizzard thinking about restricting add-ons and they're worried about losing that. Is there any intention to go after any of that kind of customization?
Not whatsoever. And in fact, we're doing everything we can to, and we would do everything we can down the line to minimize any collateral damage to them. But the goal is anything that's cosmetic should be completely fair game. All informational stuff that's out of combat, like, again, you have RP add-ons, help things that are tracking, helping with professions, tracking gathering nodes, helping you with quests, like, you name it, a bunch of accessibility add-ons, all of those, like, there's nothing harmful whatsoever about any of them. The only thing is, at the very end of the day, once we feel like we've done enough on our end to improve baseline functionality, what we'd be looking at is the ability to parse real-time combat events in a way that drives, problem solving on the fly.
So it's kind of, we build the scaffolding to then be able to take away the existing weak aura solutions that, that we have for these. How much of this is, so the thing that's excited me also about edit mode has been, it's so clearly based on what the community has learned over 20 years, right? It's like, oh, the community has revolved around this as a solution for presenting this information.
It's off center. Why? There's even guides. Blizzard, how could you do this to me? How?
Information. Let's give them that base in the UI rather than making them download something. How much of this initiative?
Ah! That hurts. I'm not even listening anymore. Why?
Give them that base in the UI
Look,
rather than making them download.
They drag
something.
up.
How much of this initiative is still going to be based on what the community says, how the community reacts, versus which of these things are already kind of locked in decisions?
I'd say basically nothing here is locked in.
Okay.
Really, you know, my hope today is to kind of begin a conversation about that direction and what areas are welcome, what areas maybe have more to do to convince the community on, and what areas we might be wrong on and should, you know, reconsider. Because I think at the end of the day, you know, this game belongs first and foremost to our millions of players. We're trying to serve them as best we can in the long run. And I think our sense is that for many players, the feeling that they have to download and use certain add-ons in order to play the game competitively isn't really part of what's attractive about the game or healthy in the long run. And so if we can pull things back to a place where add-ons are available for those who want to use them, but people aren't feeling pressured by their groups, by just the natural demands of competition and not wanting to lose out to someone who's using more advantages, then that's going to be the healthier route in the long run.
So if I was a
So I expect, based on what they're saying here, that the goal will be get all of this add-on functionality in the base game to begin with. Again, they're not getting rid of weak auras. They're just making a version of weak auras that exists inside the base game so that you don't need to download a separate thing to get that functionality. So they're going to start with that process. That is the clear initial process here. The restricting functionality is down the line a ways, and they have a lot of work to get there. They have a lot of work to do first before they can even start on that. And Ian said that multiple times in this video. I believe him when he says that. That is a long-term thing. A lot of the video and a lot of the focus is going to end up being like, oh, they're going to restrict add-on functionality. And I wish less of this video was focused on that, because I have two minds. Part of me, I wish less of this video was focused on that because it's causing people to focus on the add-on functionality being reduced when that's glossing over the important first step of putting all this stuff in the base game to begin with. And so there's going to be a lot of knee-jerk reactions of people being like, I can't believe they're even considering removing weak auras from the video game. It's like, well, they're considering removing weak auras from the video game in the sense that you won't need what weak auras does because it's already in the game. And thus weak auras will not exist in the state that it does right now because it is not a necessary add-on, because it's not adding anything. They're obviously they're talking about eventually in the far future being able to restrict some of the information that add-ons have available to it so that they can't do the thinking for you on the fly. But that's very, 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 very different from saying, I don't want a weak aura that can pop up when I need to use a proc or something like that. That's something that they're trying to get in the base UI. Now, how well they get that in the base UI is still up for question. Like there's a lot of words being said right now in terms of they have all this work to do first. How well they do all that work before they make that next step is obviously something that is like, that remains to be seen. That will be something to keep a very close eye on as things progress through the future. If the cooldown manager as it exists right now is something that they think, yeah, that's good enough, then we're screwed. Like the cooldown manager as it exists right now is garbage compared to what weak auras is capable of and what is necessary to be able to present that sort of information. It's just not useful. So there's obviously a lot of work that still needs to be done there. He did mention earlier in the video that they were planning to do some additional work on the cooldown manager, so I'm hopeful that they will add the functionality that it needs to get to where it will actually be a functional replacement for weak auras, instead of just being extra visual clutter that you might as well just drag your action bar to the middle of the screen. But I think it is very, 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 very incredibly important to not overly focus on the functionality that's going to eventually be removed at this stage, because the more important first step is focus on what are they doing to make that even possible eventually. And I expect what we're heading towards eventually is a situation in which there will be some element of customization that's still possible, just in the same way that you can still like change how your unit frames look in World of Warcraft. And you can add things and remove things from your unit frames. But so I expect we'll end up in a point where add-ons can hook into the cooldown manager functions to be able to create a different appearance, but still uses the same like baseline functionality to be able to show things. So instead of like instead of tracking every buff or debuff that exists inside of an encounter, for example, instead of tracking, hey, yeah, the boss just cast this ability on this character, or the boss just cast an ability. What ability is it? It's this ability. Okay, who do they cast it on? And then going through all that line of figuring out what just happened. Instead, it will be something where an event gets fired that says this new, like this boss tracked ability just occurred. And then the add-ons can do something with that knowledge and information. But I think it'll be, sorry, I lost the rest of that sentence. It'll be something where add-ons are still able and capable of you're still going to be capable of customizing that to an extent. I would love to see the ability to still like fire off sound events, because again, I'm someone who reacts to sound much more directly than visual stimulus. So having a sound go off when a boss is using a certain ability or not would be very, very good. I expect it'll still be customizable in that amount of sense. I don't think this is the death of weak auras. I think this is ultimately a rewriting of weak auras, but I don't think it is the death of weak auras. I don't think it's the death of DBM. I don't think any of those add-ons will cease to exist unless the developers just decide to throw in the towel, of course. But I think something like that will still exist. This is just Blizzard going, let's put a bunch of that baseline in the game so that then the additional value that those add-ons is providing is largely from a visual customization and a minor additional functionality standpoint, not just providing the functionality in the first place. Wanted the myth community to be looking at it and they don't see past reducing add-ons. That's part of why. So I have two minds about that. One is I wish they spent less time in this video talking about reducing add-ons and more time in the, let me rephrase that actually. I wish more of the overall volume of this video had been on here's what Blizzard is adding to the game in terms of add-on stuff. Less of it, like if it's a 43-minute video, right now, I would say probably 30 minutes are reducing add-ons and the remaining 13 minutes are here's the stuff that we're adding to the game and talking about what they're going to do to get to the point where they can reduce add-ons. I would have liked to see that reversed. I think 30 minutes of this should have been, here's what we're doing to get there. And then the remaining 13 minutes have been, and here's where we're eventually getting, but after we've done all this other stuff to begin with. The reason that they haven't done that is probably just because they don't have that much to say about what they're doing just as of yet. So I understand it, but it's still frustrating. At the same time, however, obviously that is going to be a big concern. If they had just kind of thrown at the end, oh, and by the way, we're going to reduce add-on functionality in the future, people would have panicked. So it is an important topic that needs to be discussed. I just think what's happening right now is people heard, oh, they're going to reduce add-on functionality in the future, and just immediately forgot the like 70 other things that Ian said at the start of this video about how they recognize and they know and are committed to making it so that that's not a big deal before they do it. And I think there's going to be a lot of panic. And it could very well be the case that it could very well end up being the case that a lot of what they do isn't good enough. It could very well end up being the case that they put all this stuff in the game, it's not good. They then break add-on functionality because they think it's good enough, and then the game is worse as a result. That's absolutely a possibility. But it is important to recognize that they have at least stated and are committed to trying to make this not a big deal before they do it. And I know for a lot of people, imagining that scenario, imagining a world in which you don't need an add-on installed is difficult. But pretend you don't need an add. Like if Diablo 4 came out today and was like, hey, by the way, everyone, we're deleting weak auras from Diablo 4. People would go, there's weak auras in Diablo 4? That doesn't even exist. The goal is to get WoW to a point where that statement has the same weight, where saying we're breaking some of this functionality in World of Warcraft, the people's reaction to it is, it's fine, I wasn't using that anyway. As like a general basic, the average player sort of thing. Like Ian said a few times in this video, like most players have a damage meter installed. Most players have some sort of weak auras or something installed. And that's insane to me. Like there are a lot of World of Warcraft players. And if he's saying if you are someone with World of Warcraft installed, it is more likely than not that you have a damage meter installed. It is more likely than not that you have weak auras installed. No matter who you are, if that's actually what they're saying here, that is a crisis for Blizzard. Like that is a problem that needs to be solved, because the average player should not need to install an add-on to enjoy your video game. And with a player base as huge as World of Warcraft's, if they've gotten to that point, that means shit's bad. That means shit's bad, and they have to solve that. So I completely get it. I am not super doom and gloom on the add-on functionality being broken as of yet. I do expect it's likely going to result in some pretty significant API rewrites, which will cause it will require a lot of add-ons that you wouldn't think of being affected, needing to rewrite some stuff. So it's possible that a lot of add-on authors will have to update things in ways, even if they're like there's like Questy and so on, will probably end up needing to reconfigure some of what they did, just because of how the add-on API gets rewritten. But I don't know. I'm feeling overall optimistic about this. There's a lot of remains to be seen. There's a lot of like I'll put it this way. The words that they're saying, I like the words that they're saying. I like the things that they have said they're going to do in this video. I like all of that. How well they accomplish it is another question. So we'll have to see how that actually works out. I'm curious to peek at this thing in 11.1.7. I don't think I'm going to use it, but I'm curious about it. And it, like, as a first step towards this ultimate eventual goal, like they need to figure out the damage meter thing. They need to figure out boss mechanics as a weak auras thing, and how to solve that before they can mess with that. But they said they're working on it, so we'll see.
Kind of person who wanted to write a 10-paragraph forum manifesto, this would be one of the topics to do it on, right?
Absolutely. We'll be reading, we'll be listening. You know, I think this is a long path ahead. And yeah, just, you know, curious to kick off the conversation and hear how people feel about it. So Rotation Assist is coming in 11.1.7, which is going to be hitting the PTR in the very near future. Can't wait to hear people's feedback as they're able to hop on and check it out. We'll be listening closely so we can make it the best it can be for everybody. It's also been amazing to just get a chance to talk through kind of the history of add-ons in WoW, where they are today, and where they might be going in the future. Thank you guys for coming out. It's really been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us here. Really looking forward to see what the community has to say about how much they want more of these casts, maybe monthly, maybe bi-weekly, weekly, whatever you guys think, put it in the comments.
Daily.
Daily?
Yeah.
You said it, it's not me. Thank you so much, Liz. This has been really, really awesome.
Yeah, I do agree. I still think bringing on Dratnos and Max for the announcement of this, it's good to have perspective from someone who is recommended or respected and known as a high level player in the game in the midst of making this announcement. So from that angle, I absolutely get it. Um, I do still a little bit worry about like public perception, because this has now kind of made Dratnos and Max like poster boys for this change occurring. I think I might have liked to have seen this instead be like start off the video with Ian going through a brief presentation of what the plans are and everything, and then move to, like, rather than having Dratnos and Max there as he's announcing things initially, at least pull them in halfway through the video or 10 minutes into the video or whatever, to then ask questions about it, so that players feel like they have a representative there present as part of the conversation. I'm just noticed now that this Wowcast logo, like the left side of this W and the right side of this W, are very different. That slope is very different from that slope. I don't know what's going on here. That's weird. Apparently I'm just noticing things that are not symmetrical today. But yeah, overall, I think there are a few steps that have to occur for this. This is absolutely, by the way, going to be the subject of Sounds Good Makes Sense. I'm probably going to upload this like segment of my stream also to YouTube as like a early. In fact, maybe after this we'll do some editing on it. But this is absolutely going to be the topic for Sounds Good Makes Sense next week. I think overall, I like the idea. I like where it's headed. In theory, I like the concept behind all of it. The questions are just going to be, how well do they actually implement the in-game stuff? Is it actually sufficient? Because the cooldown manager is not. Do they implement stuff in the game that's actually sufficient? Do they actually follow through on slimming down things like too much extra visual clutter, too much extra like abilities that don't need to exist in the first place for things like the rotation helper and so on? Do they actually treat the symptoms, or sorry, do they actually treat the disease, not just the symptoms of the problem? And once they do get everything in place, do they get it in place to a substantial enough and a sufficient enough level before they start walking back add-on functionality? And then finally, once they do walk back the add-on functionality, do they actually follow through with making the encounters less complex and actually using that advantage that's been given to them in that state? Or do we just keep getting the same encounters, but now there's less tools to deal with it? I think those are the questions, and some of those won't be answered for years at this point. Like this, I'm confident that this is something that we might not even see the add-on functionality being walked back in The Last Titan. I think at the start of an expansion is the most likely place for it. I don't think midnight is going to be when that is, unless they like really haul ass through the rest of War Within. I think the rest of War Within is going to be getting the basics in place for the in-game UI stuff. Midnight would be the point where they refine the in-game stuff to the point where towards the end of midnight, it is becoming clear that they don't need to make so much available outside of the in-game stuff. And then The Last Titan could be the point where they begin to walk back some of that add-on functionality and start looking to change some things. But it's also possible that this takes even longer than that, and that it's not until after the World Soul Saga trilogy, whatever it is completely finished. We'll see.